From the famous phrase, tu quoque fili me, to Judas Iscariot's 30 silver coins, betrayals have always represented real turning points in human history. Unexpected and decisive moments that have irreversibly marked the course of events, betrayals that have undermined trust, broken alliances, and brought down entire empires. A theme that fascinates and causes us to reflect how a single act of disloyalty can trigger such devastating consequences. Join us as we explore 5 betrayals that changed our history forever. Ephialtes of Trachis, the betrayal that sealed the fate of Thermopylae. Ephialtes of Trachis appears in the history of the Greco-Persian Wars as the symbol of betrayal, a role he assumed during the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC. Born in Trachis and son of Eurydemus of Malis, Ephialtes was a Greek shepherd whose actions would change the fate of one of the most famous battles of antiquity. While a contingent of Greek soldiers, led by the Spartan king Leonidas I, heroically defended the pass of Thermopylae to stop the advance of Xerxes' first Persian army, Ephialtes made a gesture that would irreversibly alter the outcome of the battle. His decision to ally himself with the Persians consecrated him in history as the archetypal traitor to the Greek cause. Ephialtes' treachery was consummated when he revealed a hidden mountain path called Anopeia, through which he led part of the Persian army, including the Immortal Corps, commanded by Hydarnes. This path, located along Mount Aeta, allowed the Persians to bypass the position defended by the Greeks. Although it was known to the locals and had previously been used during wars against the Phocians, the Greeks were not familiar with it. In return for his guidance, Ephialtes demanded a reward from Xerxes. Thanks to this move, the Persians were able to surprise the Greeks from behind, overcoming the obstacle that had so far slowed their advance. The betrayal had devastating consequences for the Greek defenders. After driving off the Phocian contingent guarding the path, the Persians attacked the Greek forces from behind, forcing Leonidas to dismiss most of the allied troops. He remained in the field only with his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans ready for sacrifice. The combined attack from front and rear led to the defeat and massacre of the Spartans and their allies. Despite the sacrifice of the defenders, which gave valuable time for the reorganization of the Greek forces and a strong morale boost, the destruction of the Spartan contingent was directly linked to the betrayal of Ephialtes. The subsequent Persian defeat at Salamis prevented Ephialtes from obtaining his hoped-for reward. Throughout Greek history, Ephialtes was universally condemned for his deed, becoming the prototype of the traitor. After the Persian defeat, Ephialtes fled to Thessaly, where the Delphic Pylauic Amphiphils offered a reward for his capture. Later, back in Anticyra, he was killed by Athanas of Trachis, who was rewarded by the Spartans for eliminating him. Although Herodotus reports that the killing of Ephialtes may not have been motivated by treason, his figure remains inextricably linked to the infamy of the betrayal at Thermopylae, an act that had decisive consequences for the outcome of the battle and its condemnation in historical memory. The Ides of March, Brutus' betrayal, and the fall of the Roman Republic. The betrayal par excellence, perhaps the most famous in history, if we exclude Judas' betrayal. Caesar was now at the height of his power, and the only way to stop him was to kill him. In 44 BC, Rome was going through a period of profound transformation. After years of bloody civil war against Pompey, Gaius Julius Caesar had consolidated his power, emerging as the dominant figure in the Republic. Despite his reforms and military successes, discontent was growing among a substantial part of the Senate. Many senators loyal to the Republican tradition feared that Caesar aspired to become king, establishing a monarchy, an idea deeply hated by most Romans. This climate of suspicion and opposition favored the birth of a conspiracy destined to change the course of history. Signs such as the adorning of Caesar's statues with a diadem and the episode of the Lupercalia, during which Mark Antony attempted to crown him, further fueled the conservatives' fears. In this context of growing tension, Marcus Junius Brutus, a man close to Caesar, joined the conspiracy. Although not Caesar's biological son, Brutus was the son of his mistress Servilia, and Caesar had a certain fondness for him, so much so that he pardoned him after he fought alongside Pompey during the Civil War. Brutus's betrayal was thus a devastating blow to Caesar, who was also shaken in public opinion. The conspiracy came to fruition on March 15, 44 BC, the famous Ides of March. During a Senate session at the Curia of Pompey's theater, a group of about 20 senators surrounded Caesar and attacked him with daggers. Tradition has it that seeing Brutus among his attackers, Caesar exclaimed in Greek, "Kai su teknon," "You too, son," from which the famous Latin phrase, "Tu quoque brute fili me," is derived. Caesar fell under 23 stab wounds, dying at the foot of the statue of his ancient rival Pompey. With his death, the last obstacle to the end of the Roman Republic collapsed. Caesar's assassination did not lead to the re-establishment of the Republic, as hoped by the conspirators, but threw Rome into chaos. Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, and his designated heir Octavian, initially rivals, allied to avenge the dictator's death. Brutus and Cassius, the leading Caesaricides, were forced to flee Rome. Their forces clashed with those of Antony and Octavian at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, and after the defeat, both took their own lives. The deaths of Caesar's principal assassins marked a further step toward the dissolution of the Republic. Eventually, Octavian emerged as the sole ruler of Rome, marking the end of the Republican period and the beginning of the Roman Empire, under the name Augustus. Paradoxically, Brutus's act, while motivated by the defense of Republican ideals, accelerated the transition to an imperial regime. Judas' kiss, the ultimate betrayal that changed history. Although the figure of Jesus has been widely refuted historically, the different stories concerning his life are different. Certainly, however, although not historically certain, the event that changed the fate of his life and completely changed the course of history was precisely a betrayal. In the historical context of the preaching of Jesus and his 12 disciples, there was growing tension with the religious and Roman elite. Jesus, recognized by some as the Messiah, preached a message of spiritual renewal and social justice that challenged the established authorities. Among his closest followers was Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, always mentioned last in the apostles' lists, and with the nickname traitor. Judas held the role of treasurer of the group, and the reasons for his betrayal are debated. Some Gospels suggest that he was driven by greed due to his displeasure with the use of expensive perfumed oil and the fact that he was also referred to as a thief. Other modern interpretations propose instead that he was dissatisfied with Jesus' failure to rise up politically against the Romans, or that he had disappointed his messianic expectation. Driven by controversial motives, Judas went to the high priests and offered to hand Jesus over to them in exchange for 30 silver coins, an agreement recorded in the Synoptic Gospels. On the night of Holy Thursday after the Last Supper, Jesus went with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. Judas, arriving with an armed crowd sent by the high priests, had agreed on a sign to identify Jesus: a kiss. According to the Gospel, according to Mark, Judas approached Jesus saying, "Rabbi," and kissed him, and they immediately arrested him. This now symbolic gesture sanctioned Jesus' arrest, his subsequent trial before the Sanhedrin and Pontius Pilate, and finally, his crucifixion. Jesus' death on the cross is the central event of the Christian faith, considered the sacrifice for the redemption of humanity and the basis for the birth of Christianity. Judas, seeing that Jesus had been condemned, was seized with remorse. According to the Gospel, according to Matthew, he threw away the 30 silver coins in the temple and went and hanged himself. The Acts of the Apostles give a different account, narrating that Judas bought a field with the money from the betrayal, and then, falling to his death, tore himself apart, regardless of the manner of his death. His tragic end is seen as a sign of his deep repentance and despair. The kiss of Judas has become a universal symbol of betrayal, duplicity, and deception. The term Judas has entered common parlance as a synonym for traitor. In Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, Judas is placed in the lowest circle of hell, reflecting the gravity of his act. It is important to note that the sources report slightly different versions of the events and motivations of Judas, and some modern interpretations attempt to re-evaluate his figure. However, in the prevailing Christian tradition, Judas remains the key figure in the betrayal that led to Jesus' passion. The betrayal at Place de Mir Jafar and the fall of Bengal. 1757. In the context of the clashes of the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, one is reminded of this famous battle held in India, which decisively changed the fate of the country's and the Asian continent's history. In the 18th century, India was a crossroads of ambitions, with several local powers vying for supremacy and the growing influence of the British East India Company, EIC. Bengal, a rich and strategic region, was at the center of these dynamics. Siraj-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal, came to power in 1756 and tried to resist the interference of the British Company, which enjoyed trade privileges contested by the Bengali rulers. However, discontent and personal ambitions were rife within the Murshidabad court. Among the Nawab's most important officials was Mir Jafar, the commander-in-chief of the Bengali army, who secretly plotted with the British to gain power. The tension between the Nawab and the East India Company peaked with Siraj-ud-Daulah's attack on Calcutta in 1756, also known as the Calcutta Black Hole Incident. The British response, led by Robert Clive, was swift and determined, leading to the decisive Battle of Plassey in June 1757. Although Siraj-ud-Daulah's army was numerically superior, the outcome of the battle was marked by the betrayal of Mir Jafar, who, as secretly agreed with the British, ordered most of his troops not to participate in the fight. This inaction paralyzed the Nawab's army, leaving Siraj-ud-Daulah and his loyal forces in a desperate situation. Taking advantage of the chaos and confusion, the British, astutely led by Robert Clive, easily defeated the Nawab's troops. After the defeat and execution of Siraj-ud-Daulah, Mir Jafar was installed as the new Nawab of Bengal by the British Company. But it soon became clear that he was only a puppet in the hands of the East India Company, forced to comply with their constant financial and political demands. The British victory at Plassey, facilitated by the betrayal of Mir Jafar, had enormous consequences for the future of India. This event is considered the beginning of the British colonization of the Indian subcontinent. Bengal became a crucial base for the expansion of British power into other regions of India. The betrayal of Mir Jafar has long been seen as one of the most devastating acts in Indian history, and his name has become synonymous with disloyalty, a symbol of treachery still used in politics today. The Battle of Plassey was not just a military conflict, but a turning point that marked the rise of British rule and the beginning of a long period of colonial control. Hitler's ultimate betrayal, Operation Barbarossa, and the fall of the Pact. For the last example of these betrayals, we come almost to the present day. In fact, I am talking about the famous betrayal by Hitler, who decided to break the non-belligerence agreement made with Stalin a few years earlier. On the eve of the Second World War, Europe was marked by strong tensions and political realignments. In this context, on 23 August 1939, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany and Iosif Stalin's Soviet Union, two ideologically opposed powers, signed a non-aggression pact known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This treaty, signed by the respective foreign ministers Vyacheslav Molotov and Joachim von Ribbentrop, provided for the secret partition of Eastern Europe in two spheres of influence, with Poland divided between the two powers. Despite the historical hostility between the two regimes, Stalin pursued the agreement in order to gain time and reorganize Soviet structures for a future confrontation with Germany. Apparently, Stalin seemed to trust Germany, or at least acted as if he did, ignoring numerous warnings about the imminence of a German attack. Until a few days before the invasion, the Soviet press agency, TASS, denied any German intention to break the pact. The fragile understanding between Germany and the Soviet Union was abruptly broken on 22 June 1941, when, without any formal declaration of war, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union along a 2,900-kilometer front. The Red Army was caught completely by surprise. Despite numerous warnings, the early stages of the attack were disastrous for the Soviets, who suffered huge losses in men and vehicles as the German army rapidly penetrated Soviet territory. Stalin, initially in shock, remained silent for about 10 days. His reaction, once he overcame his astonishment, was brutal. He called the Soviet people back to the fight and took severe measures to maintain order and counter defection. German aggression forced the USSR to join the Allies against Nazi Germany, radically changing the fortunes of the war. Despite his decisive contribution to the defeat of Germany, Stalin in the post-war period continued to carry out purges within his own army, suspecting many of the generals who had contributed to the victory. The strategic failure of Operation Barbarossa marked a crucial turning point in the Second World War, contributing to the final overthrow of Nazi Germany. Conclusion. In conclusion, the great betrayals of history offer us a profound reflection on the complex dynamics of power, personal motivations, and moral implications involved. These events, although often marked by violence and ruin, are also crucial moments that have shaped the course of history, altering geopolitical, social, and cultural balances. Whether political, military, or personal betrayals, their memory continues to serve as a warning, inviting us to reflect on the choices we make and the importance of integrity and loyalty in an ever-changing world.